II. He's going to rule from 1894 to 1917. Remember, he was our last czar. We've talked about him before. During his reign, we had seen the Russo-Japanese War. And we had seen that the Russians had established a sphere of influence and were seeking Korea. The Japanese, however, had already taken Korea in the Sino-Japanese War, and so we saw Russia and Japan, of course, come head-to-head. We know, no spoiler alert, because we already studied this, who won? The Japanese. They win, and that turns Russia's attention toward the Balkans, and we know that that's also not going to play out very well for them. But the treaty that ended the Russo-Japanese War was the Treaty of Portsmouth with good old Teddy Roosevelt. They are negotiating to give Russia accepted Japanese control of Korea in that time. This is the beginning. You can write to the side here, and I kind of mentioned this when we talked about the Russo-Japanese War. This is the beginning of the negativity at home. Anytime you have some pretty serious foreign policy defeats going on, negativity tends to breed at home. And so we will see that this is kind of the beginning of things that will lead to a revolution. The Russian government then turns its attention from the east, like I said, to the Balkans area, and is going to focus on the Slavs there in the Balkan region. The number one cause, however, of the Russian Revolution, not just turning their attention to the east and getting involved in World War I, is going to be their dismal showing in World War I. They are getting their behinds rather soundly beat, and so this is going to have a lot of negative impact at home. And this will become the major revolution of 1905, or the environment of the revolution to come. Many Russians were angry that soldiers were dying for a faraway cause, for a losing cause, and want their soldiers home. Okay. So these are just some reminders here. Russo-Japanese Wars, where we're picking up right now, and the Revolution of 1905. So the Revolution of 1905 is going to be where we saw liberalism slowly creeping in. We've already talked about this with the Bloody Sunday. Yes, ma'am? Sunday, Bloody Sunday. I don't know. People get all up. Yeah. There's just, it's fun. Yeah. People need to have more fun day Sundays? I don't know. So liberalism had been creeping in the Russian population for about 50 years. We saw in Russia, though, that there was a development, a small development of a professional middle class, but not the big middle class that we would have seen in France and things like that. But it is a small, increasing educational opportunities increase. Liberals also included some nobles and some leaders of the Zemstvos. We see poor economy and strains of war are going to lead our peasants. Our peasants are going to be really who uprises in Russia, and the growing urban proletariat in the middle class to demand reforms. They're still tied to the land. Remember that they had tried to free the peasants or the serfs, but they're still tied to those communal mirrors. They're still having to pay for those lands. They're not really as free as they want. And so we're going to see that the peasants are going to be our biggest here. We're going to have some workers, but not like you think workers when you think socialism and communism coming in. We're really going to rely heavily on our peasants when it comes to Russia. So if you remember on Bloody Sunday, they had desired a change in January of 1905. 200,000 workers and peasants are going to march peacefully to the Winter Palace, as we discussed. There's actually a priest named Father Gapone who's in the lead of this workers' party, but it's really more peasants. They're carrying religious icons. They have crosses. They have Bibles. They are singing hymns. The Tsar, as we know, was not home. The army opens fire on them and is going to kill 300 and wound an additional 1,000, which we know is going to spark the revolution. So we've covered all of that, just setting the stage again for the revolution today. Because of that, there's a general strike, peasant revolts, troop mutinies, and Nicholas was forced to make concessions. The first concession that he is going to have to make is the creation of a national parliament, or Duma. Remember that they have been asking for a Duma. The Zemstvos didn't have very much power. The Duma is not going to have very much power. Yes?
Is Duma the name of the parliament, or is that
the name? Yes. Duma. So the October Manifesto of 1905 is actually going to be the document that creates the Duma. I warn you that the Russian Revolution is full of months. There's going to be February. There's going to be October. There's going to be all kinds of months. And what's even crappier about this is they're not using the same calendar as we are in this time period. So they're 14 days off. So if you look at it from a Western point in a Western textbook, you're going to see that like we're in a different month than they are. And then after all of this, when they get on the same calendar, those 14 days just get erased, like never happened. So it's just odd. So it's really annoying. I think that we're on the Gregorian calendar while they're still on the Julian calendar. So I will try to stick with just the Russian dates because we're learning about the Russian Revolution and not confuse you by going back and forth. But it can get rather confusing at times. So the October Manifesto of 1905 created the Duma. They'll meet for the first time in 1906. It was a national assembly that would serve as an advisory board to the Tsar. Remember, it doesn't have as much power, just like the Zinfos. It's just really a concession. It's a reaction to the strikes. It's the largest concession he makes to try to keep people from kind of having a full-blown revolution right now. The representatives were elected by universal male suffrage, but most members of the Duma end up being liberals. They're called cadets in Russian. We're going to see that they granted freedom of speech, assembly, and the press. Liberal types of changes in this time. They're going to say you don't have to make any more payments on that land for our serfs there, etc. So we see some liberal changes, but not a lot of power. Circle the Tsar should retain absolute veto power, so he can still turn down anything he wants from the Duma, which is kind of backwards from what the mass group of people should have. Revolutionaries were divided, however, which is going to be an issue, resulting in the Duma having no real influence. So with the election, you see that you can't get one real party to get power in the Duma, and so nothing really gets pushed through either way. So not a lot of power. It appeases them a bit. What we're going to see is Nicholas dissolves the Duma at his will. He's going to dissolve the Duma twice in 1906 because he has all these censorship rules, and they start saying and doing stuff that drives him crazy. So he's like, oh, really? So he dissolves them. He will dissolve them again, and then a third Duma will be created in 1907 that was more conservative and sympathetic to the Tsar. So he starts to change the rules on who can be in the Duma. You have to be pretty much conservative, approved by him to be elected. And so we see the Duma loses even more power. So
the overall theme is that
mm-hmm. That overall theme, it didn't really ever have any power. He exerts his control over it. It's supposed to be a concession to keep liberals at bay, but he's very blatantly showing that it's not a true concession. Yeah, very good. Overall theme. So, of course, as Matt was just previewing there, rumblings are going to continue because the Duma is not appeasing anyone. The government is still cracking down on anyone revolutionary, so they're pretty much silencing you if you have an opinion otherwise. Repression will be successfully used by the regime to weaken political opponents or sympathetic critics. So this is half the story. These are the conditions necessary for revolution. Discontent, a Tsar not willing to give any say to the people, rumbling, attack of people who are trying to voice their opinion. And so all these are setting the conditions for a revolution. And then we're going to see that Russia is going to have a prime minister by the name of Peter Stolikin. He is going to try to get the people who are rumbling to like the Tsar, but also fall in line. And so this new prime minister is really going to set about to try to defeat the revolutionaries, but also get the people to be happy with the Tsar, which is kind of an odd contradiction here. But he's going to be really harsh with the revolutionaries. Stolikin's necktie is what they call a noose in this time period. He hangs lots and lots of revolutionaries. So he's very harsh on one hand to people who are standing up to the government, but he also takes people who are opposed to the government, like the peasants, like the serfs, and he is going to give them things. He is going to give us our kulaks. He is the one who gives, and kulaks we know are going to be persecuted severely later. He is going to give them property. He is going to give them a reason to support the government. He's going to free them a little bit more than they've ever been free. And so much of the land will be transferred from communes to private owners in this time. And because of his actions, even though he was really harsh on revolutionaries, he will be assassinated in 1911. Not by revolutionaries, however, but by the request of nobles who saw him as too liberal. So, yeah, he's taken out by the people he's really trying to help. So he will be assassinated in 1911. And between 1911 and 1914, many industrial strikes will happen. We're going to see violence is going to continue to occur, dissatisfaction with the Tsar's regime. And then the straw on the camel's back, you can write right here next to number 4, is Russia's poor showing in World War I directly led to the Russian Revolution. So you have all of these conditions, and then you're just going to pile on top of that how poorly we're doing even after we tried to modernize in World War I. Okay? At this very same time, we have and I'll come back to that. I think I have a socialism. Oh, yeah. Rise of socialism in Russia. In 1898, we see socialism is slipping in to Russia. The Social Democratic Workers' Party is going to be founded by Vladimir Lenin as leader. Lenin will eventually be exiled to Switzerland, but socialism at the same time, all these other conditions are going on, is creeping into Russia. Lenin will become the heir to the Marxist throne, per se. Marx died in 1883. Remember, like 12 people showed up to his funeral. He is going to become the intellectual and organizational force behind this revolution, Lenin. He really wasn't what you would think. He was from a middle class, like upper class family. He didn't really have any ties to the workers other than the fact his brother was assassinated or accused of an assassination attempt on Alexander II, of which Lenin really felt his brother had nothing with. And he's like, well, if you're going to come for my family, I'm going to come for you. And then he allies with socialism. And this is kind of, he gets very anti-Tsar, the Tsar's government. And this is kind of where his upbringing comes from. He will be exiled to Switzerland, which is where he's going to spend most of the time today's lecture, except for when Germany has the brilliant idea to use him as warfare and puts him on a sealed train and drops him off in Russia, which we'll talk about in a little bit. He's like their biggest weapon of mass destruction. They really do like seal him in a train car and send him to Russia from Switzerland. And it works for the Germans, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So anyway, you need to know how Lenin is the same and different from Marx. Okay? So Lenin, first thing. He did agree with Marx that capitalism could be destroyed only by violent revolution. He is not one of those Bernstein evolutionary, like, we can just get the vote and take our time and let the workers get their rights. He's like, oh no, it's got to be fast, it's got to be quick, it's got to be revolutionary. So he's the same as Marx in that respect. But his second idea is that revolution is possible under certain conditions, even in backward Russia. This is different than what Marx thought. Marx thought it would have to be a place like Germany, somewhere heavily industrialized with lots of workers. We don't have that in Russia. Lenin's going to say you don't need that. All you need is a group of people who are at the bottom, who are holding up the rest. And he says we have that in Russia. He says we have that with the peasants. The peasants will replace the proletariat. So he disagrees with Marx there. And his third idea or point is that there will be a dedicated elite of intellectuals and full-time revolutionaries that will lead this revolution, that it will be a small group of people. This is the biggest difference. If you want to circle here, I underlined it for you. This constituted the major difference with Marx, who believed in a revolution controlled by the workers, that it would be the workers of the world that would unite, not an elite group of leaders. We're on page 9, even there on letter C, letter A, bullet point C. And then, so that's his biggest difference. In 1903, Social Democrats or the Social Democratic Workers' Party will actually split into two factions. So you need to know this. They will be in two factions. Wait, my side's out of order. Just wait. We'll stay here. Social Democrats, they're going to split into the Mensheviks. And if any of you know Russian, this is going to be really confusing. If you don't, it's just going to be a side note. The Mensheviks and into the Bolsheviks. Mensheviks actually literally translates to mean the minority, but they're the biggest party of socialists. And the Bolsheviks literally translates to mean the majority, but they're the smallest. Why? I don't know. Except for that the ideas. I guess they thought that their ideas were the biggest. Anyway, the Mensheviks wanted to await the evolution of capitalism. This is your evolutionary socialist. So you can write evolutionary socialist next to the Mensheviks. They were like, let's give the workers or the peasants the right to vote. Slowly but surely they'll work their way into the Duma. We'll get all of this done. It'll be slow. It'll be peaceful. We don't have to have a big revolution. The Bolsheviks, on the other hand, are like, oh, heck no. Revolution, revolution now, and this is the side Lenin is on. Okay, Lenin is a Bolshevik. They followed Lenin's 3 ideas. What? Lenin starts planning a revolution in exile in Switzerland. He actually gets to come in contact with a lot more socialists while he's in exile than he probably would have in Russia. And so he gets more ideas. His ideas get grander. Lenin and Trotsky are going to be really our backbone, our 2 key figures as we see the revolution form. They're going to form the Workers' Soviet, which is a council. They think you have to have all of these little elite councils together to create a revolution. So it'll be like the Soldier Soviet, the Intellectual Soviet, so like little unions or clubs to start revolutionary ideas. Yes, ma'am? Trotsky was actually developing socialist ideas, I think, around the same time. I'm not as familiar with his backstory before he gets to Lenin as I am with Lenin's upbringing as middle class. But as far as I can remember, that he's an intellectual around this time that ideals and hasn't been exiled yet at this point, but we'll see Lenin in Switzerland and move throughout. Really, Trotsky's going to be the guy that's going to get the military and the guns, while Lenin's the idealistic one, the intellectual behind it. Yeah. Leon Trotsky's going to form the Workers' Soviets. He's going to be kind of responsible for putting all of these pieces together here in the Soviet. The workers, the soldiers, the intellectuals. And we're going to see that this all increases before World War I. So we're starting to build before World War I, and then we'll go through. So this brings us to the February Revolution. I put up here that would be March in our calendar, but it's the February Revolution as in terms of Russian calendars. We're on the Julian, we're on the Gregorian calendar. Like I said, it's a 14 days difference, and then when all of this is over, they'll just skip to our calendar, and like 14 days never happen in their calendar ever at all. Just poof, gone. So these 14 days are gone. So the February Revolution is going to be the cause for the overthrow of Nicholas II, our last Tsar. This is where things really start to lead up. So there's 2 stages of this revolution. One is February, and one is October. So we go October, February, October. October Manifesto. Lots of months here. So Russia's poor showing, like I said, in the Russo-Japanese War had damaged the regime's credibility. After 1904, there's continued widespread discontent with the regime, lack of reforms. But the most important cause for this February Revolution is the tremendous human and economic toll on Russia during World War I. Remember, they're just like throwing people at people with guns. They don't have enough armament. It's just men. They're having the most amount of casualties. They're not seeing any successes. And what happens is the Tsar thinks it's his generals. Nicholas doesn't really know anything about warfare. Let's go ahead and put all of these in. He doesn't know anything about warfare, nor did he ever really want to be a Tsar. He's a Tsar because he was born into a family that requires him to be a Tsar. His father has actually called him many times in public, that was documented, a girly girl, and that it would never really amount to anything. And I think that some of this stuck with him. I think just some he really didn't desire to do it. But anyway, he falsely thinks that it's his generals that are the problem, so he leaves Russia in the middle of all of this and goes to the front lines on the Eastern Front to lead the Russian troops, with really no military strategy in him. So big mistake. So who does he leave at home? He leaves his wife. She's going to leave Alexandra. She is German, so they don't trust her. They already don't like her. Her son, because she comes from the line of Queen Victoria, the son is going to have hemophilia. In males, it is actually a very critical condition, whereas females are carriers. And so she gets involved. And Rasputin's around before the Tsar leaves. But she leans heavily on Rasputin, which we're going to talk about even more. But she believes he has mystical powers. She's called him before when her son has fallen and probably should have bled to death internally, and he was able to like cure him. I guess that's my bias coming through. He lived, I guess, but cure him of his ailment multiple times over the phone. He's like a mystical monk. He's from an odd branch of sect of Orthodoxy. Yes.
Wait, Paul is in the
On like call. Yeah, like not even present. And like, oh, he's gonna die right here, and can you make it? And like says some enchanting thing. Yeah. And so he's pretty much in her ear. She becomes heavily dependent on him. Her husband's gone. I don't think she knew any more how to rule than he did. Rasputin starts to have her fire people. He starts to have her make decisions. She thinks he's a great advisor. I mean, he's helping her son. The people outside of this start to look in and are like, he's the one running the country, and are very upset about it. And so, all of this is going pretty poorly for the family. So they're like, well, we can't really do anything to the Tsar and his wife yet, but what we could get rid of is Rasputin. They tried to kill him several times. The first time was cyanide. It said that the dosage was enough to kill 4 humans. He drinks it in wine, does not die. Second time they shoot him. He does not die.
Yay.
Third time, and by this time they're getting a little nervous, because remember, he's supposed to be like this mystical monk, and like some of the stuff he says and things that happen later, you're almost like, maybe I shouldn't talk crap about Rasputin. I don't know. Then they throw him in the river, Nev, and he finally, like frozen river, Russian river, drowns. But actually, when they pull him out, when you drown, sometimes the body expulses water, like right when you pulled him out. So they pulled him out to check. They were like, and he does that, and then they like beat him to death. Like on his like he was technically like dead, but it scares them so bad that like this guy can't be killed. He really is what he says he is. That they just like kick him to death. I think in the movie Anastasia, if I remember correctly, he does like crawl out of the river. He doesn't. Oh. Oh yeah, I have it. Yeah, I'll put it on Envoto for spring break. When we come back, we'll have a dance. It's fun. We get to move. All right. Anyway, he's Rasputin. Just a couple things about him, because you just have to love him or hate him. He is like a mystical monk. He's usually pictured in almost all pictures surrounded by ladies. He's quite the ladies' man. I told you he kind of just like took his robes and woo, woo, woo. And he said that God wants to like pour his grace on you, but to have, which is such a Freudian, like God wants to pour his grace on you. But he's like, so ladies, in order to get God's grace poured on you, you have to commit sin, and like the perfect sin would then to be to sleep with me. And so he uses it as a pickup line. Like, yeah. And so, and I mean, actually, it said that because of his, he was so proud of his genitalia. We've seen. They did castrate him after finally pulling him from the river and beating him to death, and someone is supposedly in possession of the jar of Rasputin junk. Alright? So, that's all out there. But the whole point of this is while the general's away, we have all this craziness going on. They lose respect. This is going to be really bad for the family here. The Tsar actually dismisses the Duma again during this whole time while he's gone. So there's just nothing going good for Nicholas right now. Like the family's setting up and he's away, and you know how long it takes to get back. Okay? So what's going to happen is the revolution then is going to happen while he is away. It was centered in St. Petersburg, which will be changed to Petrograd at this time to get rid of the religious context. The revolution was started by massive strikes in January and February, largely caused by food shortages. Largely started by women. What does it sound like? Rioting for bread. It's like there should be a dissertation. There probably is out there in the comparison between the February Revolution and the French Revolution and the bread riots with the women. they're supported by workers and soldiers, but the women kind of lead the strike. I mean, it almost happened several years ago when tortilla prices went up in South America. The women started. I really thought, I really thought that things were going to hit the fan there. I mean, because the women are the ones that have to hear their babies cry when they're hungry, and their husbands strike when they're hungry, and yeah. So anyway, demonstrators demanded the overthrow of the Tsar and the creation of a provisional government. Thousands of soldiers. So remember Bloody Sunday. Nicholas hadn't been there, but they had fired on the people. Nicholas sends back communication from the front line and says, take care of those people. Like, I want you to shoot, you take them out. And the soldiers this time give their support to the revolution. They do not fire on the people. They disobey the Tsar's orders, and they join forces with the revolutionaries. And so we see kind of a different action. We see that how much of things have shifted since Bloody Sunday, where they would shoot the people, peaceful people, without even the Tsar's command. Okay. So it's at this point, there's a really great picture. I'll try to post it on Edmodo for you too, of Nicholas he's on the front lines in Germany, like with Germany, and he's just sitting on a stump. He has to abdicate his throne, like while he's on. I mean, what are you gonna do? Like you're there with your troops, he's just like on a stump, like I don't know where to go, what to do. He abdicates his throne on March 2nd, 1917. The royal family will be placed on house arrest, and then they'll ultimately be sent to Siberia. Only about 1,000 Russians died in this revolution, so not a very bloody, less than the Bloody Sunday. The Duma responded by declaring a provisional government. So provisional government to take the place in March 12, 1917. The provisional government is really going to be a dual government. It's going to be made up of two groups. Got all fancy, and then I was like, that's going to take time. Okay, then that way you can add what you want and not have to wait for me to talk all the way through. So, it's going to be similar to the French Revolution again. Remember here, like the nationalists, like, we are the French government, and we'll stay together until we get a constitution. So it's similar to that. Provisional government steps up, says we are the government, we're going to take care of things. It's a dual government. The first side of it is the liberals. So you can put a 1 here. The provisional government is the first side of this dual government. Many who wanted to stay in World War I. Okay. Then the second part of this is the revolutionaries, the Petrograd Soviet. And it's going to consist of the workers and the soldiers who had overthrown the Tsar. Okay, so there's two sides to this provisional government. They are more radical. So you need to write more radical here. This is like the sans-culottes or the Jacobins in the French Revolution. These are people who are going to want to keep pushing to the left. The Mensheviks are at first in this Petrograd Soviet. At first. And the Soviet is going to accept authority of the provisional government at first, for now, but that will change later as we start to get the ball rolling. And then I want you to put like a little star, like a bright, shiny star. This is the one time, and for a brief moment, and it's going to last for about probably 3 minutes, that I get to talk to you about like a free, happy Russia. Brief shining moment in history, and it's called Alexander Kerensky's government time. He will become the leader of the provisional government during this time, while remaining a member of the Soviet, so he kind of overlaps here. Participation of Kerensky and other socialists in the new coalition government gave the provisional government more legitimacy. He was a Soviet as well, so it allowed kind of this ease here, and we're going to see that no longer was the government exclusively bourgeoisie. They sought peace in the war without losing land to the Central Powers, so they don't want any more people to die, but they don't want to give up Russia in order to get it. They're going to implement liberal programs like equality before the law, freedom of religion, right of union. So this is the only time, like for a brief little snapshot, like Russia's really, really free. Because what they had before were the Khans, the Mongol Khans. Then we had the Tsars. Now we have this bright little shiny moment. Then we're going to have communism. Then we're going to have Putin. So, yeah. Not Rasputin. So anyway, Kerensky rejected outright social revolution. He is not for immediate revolution. He's like, let's save our Soviet brothers. Let's not shed our blood for something we can accomplish together. He didn't want to immediately confiscate the land and give it to the peasants. Lenin and the Bolsheviks will hate him. Okay? They do not want something slow. They want a revolution. And it's here, and Petrograd Soviet Union is going to give the Army Order Number 1. the other side of the government is going to start to kind of attack some things here. It's issued on March 1st, 1917. All men that have been put into the military by the Tsar will be stripped of their title and removed from the army. Their goal with this, on top of page 12 here, is seeking to replace military leaders loyal to the Tsar and to place the Soviet in firm control of the army. So they strip all officers. Their real goal had been to organize and to make sure there was no treason or anyone still loyal to the Tsar there and build a strong government. But what it's actually going to do is lead to the collapse of army discipline, because the army is very much based on discipline. And if you lose the discipline, you lose the army, really. And so it backfires. The Allies are actually going to recognize the provisional government, hoping it would continue the war on the Eastern Front, although this provisional government isn't going to last, because anarchy, point 4 here, will effectively plague Russia by the summer of 1917. Okay, anarchy, peasants are going crazy, like in the French Revolution. They are like, you're not going to give us the land, we're just going to kill all those rich people and take their land. So they're just like, things are getting out of control, the provisional government has no control, and this will result in the October Revolution. So just you need to know beginning of the year, end of the year. That's our bright shining moment. It was so brief. And goodbye. Okay, Army Order number 1 equals anarchy. And the October in our calendar, November Revolution. Okay? This is the radical stage of the revolution, just like we had the radical stage in the French Revolution. I really should do like have you guys do a comparison paper sometime. Mental note for next year. October Revolution resulted in a communist dictatorship, and it's going to be the rise of Vladimir Lenin that's going to cause all this. Germany is going to use Vladimir Lenin like a biological weapon. They get a hold of him in Switzerland. They promise him that they will get him safe passage to Russia. They put him on a sealed train. It's actually called the sealed car. This train is not to stop and not to let him off at any point until it gets to Russia. Remember, Russia's on the verge of collapse in World War I here, and the Germans really want the Russians out of this war so that they can just have a one-front war, so that they can focus their attention on France. So they have this, if you look back at it, this is a brilliant idea by the Germans, using one individual to take down a whole country in a war. So the April Theses is what Lenin speaks when he first gets off the train. He is going to reject all cooperation with the bourgeoisie that the provisional government had. And he's going to say there will be no evolutionary socialism. We are going to do this through revolution. He called for a socialist revolution and establishment of a Soviet republic, and I mean like immediately. He wants the nationalization of banks and landed estates, so everything to be taken over by the government. And in his speech he says, all power to the Soviets, all land to the peasants, and stop the war now. And so those are like his running statements, like support me, follow me, this is what we will have. Lenin believed that a communist revolution, his point number 3, could happen in backwards Russia, and he plans to make it happen. The provisional government will seek to hold down or repress the Bolsheviks, but were largely ineffective. Lenin will be forced to flee back to Finland, but will continue making orders to the Bolsheviks from there. And the Bolsheviks will gain a slim majority in this time in the Petrograd Soviet by the summer of 1917. Okay. So, we have the Bolsheviks setting up, we have Lenin back, we have him demanding these changes. What we need to happen now, or what will happen now, is we are going to see the fall of the provisional government. So this bright, shiny star moment is going to come to an end. Kerensky is going to be, the provisional government is going to be attacked from the right and the left. On the right, the army is going to be attacking the provisional government. They've just been stripped, they've been in this, they weren't still loyal to the Tsar, they've stood up to the Tsar. On the left, we have Lenin and the Bolsheviks attacking, so it's being attacked by both sides. General Kornilov is going to put a conservative party together to plot to overthrow Kerensky's government. They're dissatisfied with how they're handling the Bolsheviks and peasant seizures of land. To show you how weak Kerensky's government was, he actually lets Bolsheviks out of jail, arms them, and has them defend his government. So it shows how weak he already was, or how the government already was. However, this Kornilov military coup won't be successful. It will fall through because they have no follow-through. The army kind of backs out. However, because Kerensky gave the Bolsheviks all of these guns, he will lose credit with the army. Okay, so it further damages the government. Fear of a right-wing counter-revolution played into the Bolsheviks' hands, as they were able to cast themselves as the defenders of the revolution. Like, look, you didn't like us, we just saved the whole country. Look at us. So it gives them some like positive spin. Kerensky's refusal to end the war, World War I, and prevent anarchy led to the fall of the provisional government. So ultimately, it's World War I we keep coming back to as the fall of Russia. Okay, in this time. The Politburo is a small, dedicated elite group, just like Lenin said you had to have a communist revolution. It was formed to organize the revolution. It included Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, which we'll be talking about a lot later, Kamenev, and Bukharin. Every communist today has a Politburo or a small group that runs it, even though Marx would say that you wouldn't need this. You just needed everyone to unite. This is how communism is kind of developed today. On October 25th, Leon Trotsky, leader of the Petrograd Soviet, the Red Army, they're called the Red Army because they believe that they're most communists red. We're going to shed our blood for the worker. It led the Soviet overthrow and arrest of the provisional government, and then Trotsky allows Lenin to be named leader. So we have Trotsky with the army. We have Lenin, who is named leader. Trotsky kind of ends up being the second most important figure in the October Revolution. And on October 26th, the Bolsheviks, who controlled the Central Committee of the Congress of the Soviets, officially took control of the government. So circle number 3 there. October 26th. Opponents of all of the Bolsheviks were arrested, including many Mensheviks. This is where we get to Lenin's 4 points. All right. And so the Cheka, or the secret police of the Bolsheviks, will be formed. They are tasked with taking out any opponents. So what they say is, hey, we're taking over the government for the good of the country. We'll have elections in a little bit. But meanwhile, all the secret police is running around taking out any opponents to the Bolsheviks. New elections for the Constituent Assembly will happen. Lenin runs under the campaign of peace, land, and bread. Peace meaning let's get out of World War I and save our Russian brethren. Bolsheviks lost, however. Even with everything that they'd done in this new light that they'd had, they lose. They get only 29% of the vote. So they have a decision. Do we stand by the vote, or do we just go ahead and take over the government anyway? They go ahead and take over the government anyway militarily. They just ignore the vote. And the Bolsheviks soon thereafter were named the Communist Party, and we have Russia back under the control of a dictatorship at this time. The surprising result of the revolution was not that the Bolsheviks took power, but the fact that such a small majority in Russia were able to keep power. The Bolsheviks will keep power. When were you guys born? 1990? Okay, so almost up to your lifetime. 1989, 1990, we'll see this reign come to an end. So it's not so impressive that they took power, but how long they really kept it. We saw small groups take power all over the world in revolutions, but as long as they kept it's the impressive part. All right, so that takes us to Lenin's reforms. Lenin is going to give land to the peasants, which is a little redundant because they already went and killed the people and took the land, much like the Great Fear in the French Revolution, but he'll also give direct control of individual factories by local workers' committees. He will, as we already talked about in World War I, sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918, which took Russia out of the war. It was clear to Lenin that Russia had already lost the war to Germany, so he just wants to get out of it. But remember, he had to give up 1/3 of its population and 25% of its land. And I want to explain a little bit further here because I just hit on that briefly with World War I. Why he's okay with doing that is because he feels that in a little while anyway, communism is going to take over the world and boundaries won't matter. All of the workers will just unite. And so he's like, I'll just be getting the land back in a couple years anyway. That's why he's really okay with it. Lenin will at this time move the government from Petrograd to Moscow. He will then also reorganize the army with Trotsky, and those actions result in much opposition to the Bolsheviks. And ultimately, we're going to go straight from a revolution to a civil war. And this is where the United States steps in, and this is where all of our problems in the Cold War start, because this is the Archangel thing. So we'll have the Reds versus the Whites in Russia. So the Civil War erupts right after, like, wait, we voted. You only got 29% of the vote. You took over the country militarily. You went ahead and made all of these changes. We didn't get anywhere. This is worse. This is like a dictatorship, just a czar with a different name. And so we have a split. We have the Reds, which are going to be the blood of the workers, the Bolsheviks, versus the Whites, which are the officers of the old army that were kicked out, as well as 18 other groups that were kind of comprised of different people who had complaints against the Reds. They have no real leader to unify them, which is going to be the problem. And spoiler alert, we know the Reds won, because I just told you up until 1990, almost your birth, that they're going to remain in control because the Whites were not united. Okay, the Whites didn't have a leader, like they didn't have a Lenin, they didn't have a Trotsky. The Reds held the center of Russia, while the Whites were all disorganized on the outside of Russia. Many peasants feared the Whites and thus supported the Reds anyway, even if they didn't really agree with them. We will see that both sides, however, proved to be extremely brutal, and 2 million Russians will leave Russia in this time due to the Civil War. Allies, meaning us, will at this time with Britain and France send an Archangel expedition. We will support the Whites, hoping that to keep Russia in World War I. This is going to cause bad relations, because the Soviets, the communists, always think that we tried to strangle them in their cradle, that we tried to take them out in their birth and didn't give them a chance. And then when it comes to relations after this and after World War II, they're like, I don't know if we can ever trust you. You pretty clearly don't like us. Why should we trust you? And so bringing back there. I do want to talk about war communism at this time. The Bolsheviks are going to mobilize the front for the Civil War. They're going to act like other countries did in World War I with total war. It's during this Civil War that the Bolsheviks take total economic control in the country. This is our earliest form of socialism in the Soviet Union. It applied a total war concept to the Civil War, meaning like even civilians, if you are an opponent, if you stand in our way, we will take you out. They declared that all land was nationalized, the state took control of heavy industries and ended private trade, forced peasants to deliver food to the towns. The Cheka or secret police will hunt down and execute thousands of opponents, as you can see here, just one by one by one by one. Shot in the head, shot in the head, shot in the head. Thousands of opponents of the Reds, and even including the Tsar and his family. And so this is kind of where the Anastasia story picks up and all of the things that make it interesting. They are in Serbia in house arrest, and they are asked to line up for a family portrait, like, hey, we'd like to get a picture of the royal family, the Reds have won. And they take them down to this room in the house, and it's not a family portrait, they're lining them up so that they're easy to shoot. However, what Rasputin had said before he finally died was, if you mess with me, bad things will happen to, like, if you let something happen to me, to the Tsar's family, something bad will happen to you and anyone who does harm to any of us. And so, in an unfortunate circumstance or fortunate circumstance, all of the ladies are wearing these, like, money belts with all of the family jewels they smuggled in there, so it's really, like, created this armor, or almost like Kevlar. And so they're shooting at them, and the bullets are bouncing off of the jewels and, like, ripping through flesh all around the room and ricocheting. And so these soldiers get really, really freaked out. They think, like, with the Rasputin thing, he wouldn't die forever. Here's this family that now won't die. And ultimately, they spend a lot more time than they want and a lot more violence, where it was supposed to be kind of this line up and shoot, and taking the family out. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and which is where the mystery of the Anastasia comes from, because one of the bodies never turned up. They did end up finding, they have found all of the remains now in the DNA test. But the mystery of Anastasia is because they did freak out so much. They were like, oh my god, like the bullets are bouncing off of them, the girls, and like, what's going on? And so it freaks them out, and so instead of just ditching them as they were going to, they went to these crazy lengths to like take the bodies apart and like didn't want them to come back alive or whatever. But one body doesn't surface. There'll be these two ladies in America, one Smith, one Anderson, that will claim to be Anastasia, but years later they disproved the Smith lady because her handwriting doesn't match. Like, there's no way. And then she refused to take a DNA test when DNA came around. And then the Anderson lady will fail the DNA test, but people still continue to follow her as Anastasia, and she continues to declare that she was Anastasia. I think she passed away maybe 2 years ago, not very long ago. But anyway, there's this big secret, the movie of Anastasia. I mean, there's all of this like weird superstition around it, and the way that Rasputin was, and then with the family. But ultimately, this is the end of our last Tsar. This is the time of Red Terror, and how Lenin really gets here is someone tries to assassinate him, and he goes a little bit crazy. Remember, his brother had been killed, and this just sets it off, and so he feels like he has to get rid of any enemies. So we see all of these mass killings. But by 1921, the whole point of that story, the Reds were victorious. The Communists were extremely well organized and highly disciplined, which is why, as a minority, they were able to win. The Red Army prevailed under Trotsky's leadership. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, is created in 1922. Okay, so you need to definitely circle that and know that this is the changing point. That is number 3 under D there. Oh, and there's Nicholas and his family. Just beside the picture, there's the remains that they did find. And of course, the movie Anastasia, very cinematic, but yeah, sad affair. The whole family gone. But results of the Russian Revolution, I've already covered some of these. You know that there's 15 million people dead. That's not including World War I. We know that those numbers are kept separate. The economy is ruined. International trade is gone, and millions of workers fled the country. But it is also the creation of the world's first communist society, one of the monumental events of the 20th century, and is going to impact us as we move through our last unit in this class. As we get back from spring break, so right into the beginning of April. So that is the Russian Revolution in